exceptional.
Who is the most irreplaceable Red on this roster? Nick Kral's put a deep pool of talent together, but there's one guy that I think the Reds would have a hard time replacing if he has an extended absence. We'll talk about who that is on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily source for all things Cincinnati Reds. I'm Stephen Offenbaker. He's Jeff Carr, and we love baseball. We love the Cincinnati Reds, and we have taken that love for the game, that love of the Reds, and we have turned it into information for you. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are live. It is Aloha Friday, and we have a show for you. We are going to be talking about exactly who we think is the most irreplaceable Red, and Jeff almost said some really crazy things there in the opener. If you guys saw that, he caught himself and did not say the I word. I did. I was laughing over here, Jeff. Also, we're going to be talking about TJ Antone because a lot of you guys were a little miffed that we left him out of our bullpen discussion earlier this week. So we're going to dig into that and talk about why exactly we did that and what we think about TJ Antone. And of course, we're going to put you all in the driver's seat, taking your questions and comments along the way. Before we get into any of that, we're going to shout out the sponsor of today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Jeff, where do you want to start? Do we want to talk TJ Antone, or do we want to get into the most irreplaceable Red?
Let's do the irreplaceable Red because I've got some thoughts on TJ Antone, but I think this is kind of where I want to take today's episode because I was looking at this, and we've talked a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, especially since Frankie Montas was signed, that Nick Krall has done a fantastic job building a deep roster. There's a lot of talent with which the Reds can pull from. David Bell can build some very fun lineups. He can really do a lot with the bullpen. The starting rotation has 5 better options, but there's like 6, 7, 8 guys that they can choose from. It's really awesome to see. But when it comes to, the season as a whole, who is the most irreplaceable Red? Because you immediately go to the talented guys. You go to Elly, you go to Matt McLain, you go to Hunter Greene. You maybe even think of Andrew Abbott or guys like this. The Reds actually have some guys that can fill in a pretty admirable and good way if one of those guys gets hurt. I'm talking about one. I'm not talking about if all of them get hurt, we have a whole different discussion. But if one guy goes down, that one guy cannot be Spencer Steer. And here's why. They moved Spencer Steer into the outfield for a couple of different reasons. They have a glut of infield talent. There's a lot of guys who can really play baseball at a high level for the Reds in the infield, and they need outfielders. Plus, they want to get his bat in the lineup any way they can. They don't want Spencer Steer to be a part-time guy. He deserves to be an everyday player. Best way to do that is in the outfield because, and this is a huge reason why I have Spencer Steer on this, Steve, there's only one, who is the only other right-handed outfielder on the 40-man roster with Major League Baseball experience?
Stuart Fairchild.
And don't get me wrong, in a pinch, he can fill in very admirably. But if he's got to do it 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row, I don't feel really good about that. So if Spencer Steer goes down, there's not a ready-made replacement. Plus, if you think about any of the other guys that get hurt, the reason that you're not okay with it, but the reason that the Reds roster can kind of fill that hole is because of Spencer Steer. So if he goes down, the Reds have a lot of problems on their hands.
Spencer Steer is a good pick, and all of your arguments do make sense. And I'm going to give you a different name here in a minute, but let's talk about Spencer Steer a little bit and just what he meant to this team last year. He played in 156 games, Jeff. I mean, he was pretty much out there all of the time. He managed to amass 665 plate appearances during his time offensively, 23 home runs, 86 RBIs, slash line 271, 356, 464. That would be a big loss. And then defensively to replace him would be a problem, because you're right. The only other right-handed bat is, in fact, Stuart Fairchild, who is, in my estimation, he's okay. He is a 4A type of outfielder guy. He's a good spare part to have around. I think you're right. It would be a big loss if the Reds did not have Spencer Steer available to them for a long period of time. Where I'm going to disagree with you that it's the most irreplaceable is I'm going to stick with the outfield, but I'm going to tell you that it's TJ Friedl. And that may surprise you, because you think, well, he's not in that list, right? He's not in that phenom rookie class that we keep talking about. But here's why he's the most irreplaceable. Number one, you lose a guy that's the ultimate disruptor from the top of the lineup. You're not going to be able to just stick anybody else in there and get that same type of disruption, both in the batter's box and on the base pass. You're not going to be able to just stick somebody else in there and not have to juggle the rest of the lineup. A loss of Friedl would impact almost everybody in the lineup. And then let's talk the real reason why he's the most irreplaceable, and that's defensively, because to replace TJ Friedl in center field with the roster as it's currently constructed, you need two guys. You're not going to be able to just stick somebody in center field and have them play every day. There's nobody else that's an everyday outfielder. Everybody else that you stick out there would need to be a platoon. Even if you move Friedl over there, you need the right-handed half of it. If you move Benson, you need the right-handed half of it. So you need two guys to replace him in the field. You can't just replace him in the lineup. You would have to move everybody around. You know, I call him all the time the great disruptor. He would be the great disruptor if he was unavailable for a long period of time for this Reds lineup.
Very disruptive to the Reds. Yes, absolutely. I do agree with that. And I think that part of our arguments are actually the same when it comes to how you replace that guy, because you could move Jake Fraley to left field, no problem. But it's when lefties are on the mound that you have the biggest issue. And we always get the pushback of, well, why don't they give them more opportunities against lefties? That's not the way the league moves anymore. You mitigate the amount of weak spots that a player has to go against. Like Fraley and Benson both have shown, in very small sample sizes, but they have shown no ability to hit lefties in any form or fashion. So the Reds are not just going to simply do that. They might have to do that, might be forced to do that if Nick Krall doesn't go out and get some sort of like league minimum type bench guy who's a right-handed outfield bat. Because especially if you're talking about TJ Friedl does something that no other left-hander does in the outfield, and that is he hits lefties well. In fact, his splits are kind of reversed. He hits lefties better than righties. But his defensive prowess out there is so important, because I think really the only guy I would feel comfortable replacing him with is Jake Fraley, and then we get back to the whole left-handed pitching conversation. So I think that it's definitely a worthy point. And then the lineup thing as well. There's plenty of fast guys on this team. There's plenty of decent contact guys on this team, but there's nobody that I trust to disrupt the game with a bunt more than TJ Friedl. In fact, I think I'm going to go in with the belief that I don't want anyone else bunting other than TJ Friedl this year. And really, it's only to just be a disruptor. I don't even know about sacrifice bunts, but that's a whole nother conversation. I agree with your point as to why TJ Friedl is up there. I think that the lineup can absorb him in a different way, but you definitely would have to change the way that the lineup looks without him on it.
It's a fair argument, and we both picked outfielders, which is interesting because I think it also
points to something that Nick Krall hasn't done.
They don't have, correct. They didn't go out and get anybody, so they're going to have to create an outfielder. And it could be Jonathan India, could be CES, could be Noelvi Marte. They're going to have to create an outfielder, and I hope that happens. If they do, if we get through Goodyear and somebody has established themselves as a viable right-handed platoon partner for the outfield, then the loss of either one of those guys becomes a little easier to absorb, especially if, you're talking about, well, we move we'll use CES as an example. CES is just playing right field now, and Candelario is at first, and Noelvi's at third, and that's not a bad lineup. I think we can all live with that. But
yeah,
if that doesn't happen, then the Reds got big problems if anybody gets tweaked.
Well, and that's the other part of this too, is that it's like, yes, I would love it if that happens, and I think this roster is really strong if that happens. But the key part of this is if that happens, I don't think we can count on that. And as much as we've been talking about it, like saying, hey, Marte or CES in right field would be a lot of fun, neither one of us is sitting here saying that's exactly what they should do and that's exactly what's going to work. We hope that would work. That shouldn't be Nick Kral's roster playing. I think that there's still probably not necessarily a minor move, but minor as opposed to, they're not going to go out and sign Teoscar Hernandez, but they could go out and they get like a Michael A. Tucker, or, maybe they get a Michael A. Turner Tucker. I just blanked on his name. Or they go and they get that level of player. They're not going to get a guy that costs a bunch and is going to require a press conference. It's going to be a guy that sits on the bench and comes off the bench for him. So I think that's really where we get
screwing up the names is my bit. And before we get out of this segment, Jeff, we both have talked about outfielders. We've talked about position players all the way around. Neither one of us went pitching, but Pierre checks in the comments over here and says, that being said, Alexis Diaz is the most irreplaceable Red. Just quickly, your thoughts on Alexis Diaz being the most irreplaceable Red, because I think there's an argument to this.
Pierre's got a point, and I really did think about picking him. My only thought is my belief on relief pitching. It's a very fickle thing, and somebody could easily step up. Now, they won't be the same level. Like I have said before, Fernando Cruz had a better strikeout rate and a better walk rate than Alexis Diaz had last year. But I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable with Fernando Cruz being slotted into Alexis Diaz's role. I think it would be more of a committee approach that the Reds would be able to replace him with. And that's what a lot of teams have done. That's why the bona fide closers, like I always think of Eric Gagne, the Eric Gagnes of the past are few and far between. Like if you name the top 5 closers in baseball right now, it's kind of hard because there's like 1, 2, maybe 3 guys that deserve to be at the top of that list, but you can make a bona fide argument for the rest of the 27 closers after that.
I see an argument for it being Alexis Diaz just because of the innings the bullpen would have to absorb, the high leverage situations somebody else would have to be used in. And I'm not sure who that would be. I think you're right. It would be a committee, but somebody would pitch the innings. Somebody would become the next high leverage guy. Somebody would step up and be that next guy, but it would be a big blow to the bullpen. There's some real validity in that comment. I mean, any of the guys we mentioned today, whether it's Spencer Steer, whether it's TJ Friedl, whether it's Alexis Diaz, any of those type of players where there's not a clearly defined replacement would really make it difficult.
And there's a name that we haven't mentioned when it comes to the possibility of replacing Alexis Diaz. We haven't mentioned him at all when we're talking about the bullpen here recently, and there's a very big reason as to why TJ Antone has been out of our discussions as of late. We'll tell you what that is coming up next. It is the final week of the NFL season, and there is so much to be had over on FanDuel. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and get started. New users who place a $5 wager can get $150 in bonus bets back. That's right, win or lose. Money lines, point spreads, over-unders. If you want to do a prop bet and throw $5 on it, you get $150 back if you're a new user. Go to FanDuel.com/lockdown right now. You can throw $5 on a future. Now, I do believe that the bet has to end for you to get the $150. So I wouldn't recommend placing a $5 money line bet on the Reds winning, or a $5 bet on the Reds winning the division, because then you'll have to wait until after they win the division to get that $150. But that's still at plus 450. I'd go check it out. FanDuel.com/lockedon. New users can take advantage of this promo. $5 bets, get them $150 back. Guaranteed. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL, and they're the official sportsbook of Locked On. Locked On has created the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. It's Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Go check it out. Subscribe to it right now. You've got the local experts like me and Steve and other teams as well. And you've got the national experts on the national shows and stuff like that talking about the biggest stories each and every day. That's Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Go subscribe to the first ever national sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. And coming up next week, we will continue the Reds' road to spring training and taking a look at this roster as most of the big moves are done. Could the Reds add, and I looked it up just to make sure that I got the name wrong, and I did get the name wrong. I got the other names wrong, too. It's Michael A. Taylor, not Tucker Turner. I don't know what I was talking about there, but yeah, they could go get him. That's looking real good on my part. But let's jump into a name that we haven't mentioned, because when we talked about the pitching hierarchy, the 13 pitchers that the Reds could have on opening day, we even mentioned outside candidates. We mentioned names that we'll see throughout the year. We did not say TJ Antone in any capacity. And there's been a lot of people that have been like, yo, why didn't he even mention TJ Antone? Here's the thing with that. Our premise was we were not talking about injuries. We were saying that everybody was healthy, everybody's ready to go. I still think even in that reality, I've got to see TJ Antone on a mound before I can kind of count him in these plans because of everything that he's gone through over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's where I was when we talked about considering everybody's healthy. I don't view TJ Antone as a viable piece of this team right now. That's not a knock against TJ Antone. Listen, if you've been following him at all on social media through the course of these Tommy John rehabs, he has posted videos of him, trying to get back. He has been busting his butt. Nothing short of miraculous. The fact that he was able to come back from the second Tommy John last year and actually get on a big league mound. Now, I know the Reds shut him down, and there's some question as to whether or not they shut him down just in an abundance of caution because of his history, or if he was, in fact, just that hurt that he had to be shut down. The fact is this with TJ Antone. In his career now, going back to 2020, his rookie season, he pitched 13 games in 2020. Of course, that was the COVID year, smaller set of games available. In 2021, he managed 23 games for a total of 33 innings. Tommy John did not pitch in 2022. 2023, he comes back and he's in 5 games. So we're talking about a player over a 4-year span that's made it into 41 baseball games for a total of 74 innings. He is not a picture of reliability right now. And what I'm with you, Jeff, what needs to happen for me, what I need to see is I need him to go to Goodyear. I need him to get all the way through spring training. I need him to be the great disruptor and pitch like the guy that we all kind of think that he is and hope that he is when he's healthy. Because again, 2 Tommy Johns in, we're not quite sure who he is really. We've seen 5 games since the second Tommy John, total of 5.2 innings. So I don't know that he's that guy for the bullpen. He really, in everyone's mind, I think, should be considered the great unknown, a new addition even. And if he can go fight his way onto this roster, and the Reds are going to have to make a move there, guys, someone's got to go to make room for TJ Antone that we talked about in that bullpen episode. If he can do all of those things, then it's a great problem for the Reds to have, because it means that TJ Antone is back and he's a force. And that's what I want to have happen. That's what I want to see happen. But I don't know that that's a realistic expectation right now heading into the 2024 baseball season.
Yeah, I don't want it to seem as though we don't believe in his talent. We believe in his talent. I just don't know about the health. You mentioned the 5 appearances last year. His 5th appearance ended with him leaving with elbow soreness. And they said later it was more precautionary, and had there been more time in the season, he probably would have returned. We don't know. I mean, that's a very nice way to put it. I just know this. Dude's had 2 Tommy Johns. He leaves his last appearance with some sort of elbow injury, however minor. I've got to see him throw this spring training before I count him in any sort of bullpen that the Reds might have. If they can get the old TJ Antone back, great. I just don't know that that guy is there anymore. And what does TJ Antone look like now? Can TJ Antone pitch? Can he be healthy? That's what we got to find out first before we find out just how much of an impact that he can have on this Reds roster. And again, this is not meant as a slight on him, but as of right now, the Reds bullpen does not need him. It can function without him, as it did for pretty much all of last year as well. So I think that he should be considered as the icing on top, like the added thing that if it works out, that's great, but the rest of it's still going to be okay if he's not able to go. And I just right now I don't put him in any sort of category as that I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. I really want to see him healthy. I just don't know that that's going to happen.
Before we move off of him, Jeff, a little fun exercise. Who would you get rid of? Who would he replace in the Reds bullpen that we laid out? The bullpen that we laid out is Alexis Diaz, Emilio Pagan, Nick Martinez, Lucas Sims, Sam Moll, Ian Jabot, Buck Farmer, and then a spot for either Williamson, Young, or Cruz. So there's that 8th spot. So do you get rid of your innings guy, your workhorse in Ian Jabot for TJ Antone, who you don't know how many innings? Again, he's never pitched more than 35 innings in his major league baseball career. So you'd be giving up 75 innings for 35 innings. Do you give him that final roster spot, which means no Cruz, which means Williamson's in AAA, and which means Alex Young is in AAA, and there's only one lefty in the bullpen? Or do you get rid of somebody else?
I think, and there might be a point to be made about that second lefty that I'll make here in just a few seconds, but I think you probably replace him with Jabot. Because I don't know that Jabot, I would hope that Jabot can keep it up, but the whole workhorse mentality thing, like we have said, he's doubled his innings the last couple of years. I think there's a point where you kind of wonder if he's going to stay healthy through that. What?
Later. I'll tell you later.
All right.
For me, Jeff, that's too big a gamble. Even if Antone has a healthy spring, you don't know what 35 innings plus, once you cross that 35 inning mark, you don't know what that's going to look like on his arm, an arm that's been rebuilt twice. That's a big gamble. And Ian Jabot out of options. So someone would pluck him.
Yeah.
Someone would take him away. So it's not like a piece you can bring back. So I think if you're going to do this, if TJ Antone is going to make the team, it probably is that 8th spot, which means no Fernando Cruz, which means no second lefty in Alex Young, and which means that Williamson, which we thought probably would already be at AAA, being a starter and being stretched out. So really it's a choice between having that second lefty or not, I think. And then I'd be okay with that, I guess.
And I think that there's a point to be made about Williamson definitely starting in AAA, and it's because the Reds actually just added, I believe it was yesterday, it was announced, a non-roster invitee left-handed relief pitcher in Justin Bruihl, who is really good against lefties. In fact, last year against left-handed pitching or against left-handed hitting, he had a 176 batting average against. Now it was in not a lot of at bats, but he was just really able to limit those lefties. He has a K per 9 against lefties of 9.31 last year, and he keeps the ball on the ground 58% of the time. Like, he is a guy, and it's small sample size, but he's going to be a dark horse to make this bullpen. Instead, like they could put him up against Alex Young. Do you pick him over Alex Young? How do they pitch in the spring? And then how does TJ Antone pitch in the spring? How does Fernando Cruz? That last bullpen spot is going to be highly contested, because I think that the Reds agree with you that they would not replace Ian Jabot with any one of those guys, at least not right out of the gate. So I'll be interested to see how that goes down. Plus, Justin Bruihl, if he does make the 40-man roster, has an option. So he could be a guy that goes in between Louisville and Cincinnati. But I think that what we are saying in all of this is this: whatever capacity that TJ Antone is able to, produce for the Reds this season, it will be a very added benefit and should not be counted on.
Yeah, that's probably a fair take. And, coming up, we're going to put you in the driver's seat. We're going to take your questions and comments. We'll talk more about TJ Antone. We'll talk more about this bullpen. We'll talk about all of the things that you guys want to talk about. And we're going to get to that right after this.
Sometimes buying tickets to your favorite team's next game can be a hassle. Game Time does not want it to be that way. I love using the Game Time app because it's super easy to find the ticket that you want, the seat that you want, and find a good price there as well. In fact, if you look at it right now, the Bengals got their last home game this Sunday against the Cleveland Browns, and tickets are pretty cheap. Now, granted, it's going to be interesting to see exactly what's on the table as far as how good this game's going to be. But if you want to go to a Bengals game and you haven't been there just yet, tickets are as low as $37 on Game Time right now. Or if you want to get some Cyclones tickets, there's that. Dayton basketball, Xavier basketball, Cincinnati basketball. Cincinnati's got their first conference game coming up this Saturday against BYU in the Big 12. So many different options on the Game Time app. Download it today to your phone and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Game Time is the way that I go to games, is the way that Steve goes to games. For Reds, it's perfect for the Red season because you can just pull up, get your parking spot, and then open up your Game Time app and see what last-second deals they've got, because they've got the last-minute deals at the lowest price, guaranteed. Download the Game Time app and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase.
You can follow us in between episodes. You can follow me on X, because as Jeff likes to say, we're X-Men now. You can follow me on X at @SOffenbaker with 2 Fs. You can follow Jeff at Jeff Carr. That's Jeff with 3 Fs, because as I tell you, spelling is hard for him. He went to Alabama, and not that Alabama. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. There's no Fs in that, Jeff, in case you were wondering.
Did I make it better if I didn't go to that Alabama? Like, they're really
It
not.
might, it actually might. When I said it, I'm like, that might not be the dig. That might not be the dig I'm intending it to be. Also, if you want to see that Jeff can actually spell and I'm just messing with him, head over to InsideTheReds.com. It's affiliated with Sports Illustrated. Jeff's writing over there about these Cincinnati Reds. I pop in from time to time, write about these Cincinnati Reds, along with James Rapine, Rick Uccino, Audie Elmore. Great crew of guys over there writing about Reds baseball, just like we talk about Reds baseball every day. Also, get on our Discord server. Great community over there. There's a link down in today's show description. We're talking Reds. There's a Bengals channel. There's Off Topic channel. There's a Bash David Bell channel. It's not really a Bash David Bell channel, but it's David Bell discussion. There is all kinds of things. Immaculate Grid. We got it all covered. Check us out on Discord. All right, Jeff. It is time to put these folks in the driver's seat. And I wanted to start with this one because something you said triggered a reply from Corey. Corey says he's in on Elly getting some bunt hits. He drops a few down and starts to bring the infielders in. And then the more of his hard hit balls can get through the infield because he's drawn the infield in. If there is one other guy that could be a TJ Friedl type disruptor in this role, I think Elly could be the guy,
especially because of how fast he is. I mean, if he lays down even a semi-good bunt, doesn't even have to be a perfect bunt, but a semi-good bunt could probably get him to first. I do think we're going to get ourselves into that whole, discussion. Remember when we had Billy Hamilton, but Elly is a far better hitter than Billy Hamilton ever could have been. So I don't want it to seem as though if he strikes out, then everybody's immediately going to, well, why didn't he try to lay down a bunt there? Because Elly can hit the ball to Kentucky. We've seen it happen. So I really think that this will be a strategic part of his game, much more so than in a rare part of his game, much more so than, what TJ Friedl can do with it. But he's got the ability to do it. I definitely believe that.
You and I talk a lot about spring training and statistics, and they don't mean anything, and it's guys getting their work. This year's starting to feel a little bit different. And Carrie says spring training is going to be fun to watch. Musical chairs for positions. Guys are going to be trying out all different kinds of places to play. There's going to be a battle for making that 8th bullpen spot. There's going to be a battle for the starting rotation. And I use that comment in that to ask you this, Jeff. We always talk about how the spring training statistics really don't matter. Do they matter this year, or is it more about the eye test? Is it more about how a guy looks in his 4 innings of work as a starter, or how he looks coming out of the bullpen? Because again, those guys are facing a lot of minor league hitters that are not going to be in Major League Baseball. So, there was that one year where Amir Garrett struck out every single batter that he faced in spring training, and then the season did not quite go that way, to say the least. So what do you make of this? How do you do these? How do you do these evaluations when you're putting, major league guys that should be striking that guy out in a minor league situation and then using it to see whether or not a guy makes the roster?
It's eye test. Like, you can kind of ascribe a few statistics, but even then it's got to be with 100 grains of salt, because think about the spring trainings that Joseph Daniel Votto had in his career. None of them were impressive. Think of the spring trainings that Neftali Soto had in his career. They were very impressive. And he himself, you probably had to go look up that name whenever I said Neftali Soto, because he didn't really do that much for the Reds in the regular season. Spring training statistics are a lot of fluff. And even if you're talking about pitching, like, they're going to be watching velocity. They're going to be watching pitch placement. They're going to be seeing how they're able to move it throughout the zone. They're not talking about strikeouts and walks and homers and hits and things like that when it comes to spring training and how it's going to be evaluated. Plus, they're also going to evaluate them, during practice and on the backfields and things like that. So there's going to be stuff that not even we're privy to on television that I think that is the 1% surface level that we see, and the rest of the evaluation is the 99% below that level of why you've got, former players coming to be like advisors and scouts and things like that to help them out in spring training, because they need people that have that baseball experience and can understand what it looks like on the field, who's looking the best. That's the guy that's going to win out.
This comment, what happens if Steer doesn't pick up left field how we expect? Do the Reds have a backup plan? Well, I think the Reds have seen enough of Spencer Steer in left field to say that he's going to be the left fielder. If he doesn't improve at all, I think he plays left field at a level they're comfortable with. I don't think that any of us are really comfortable with it, but we would accept it to keep Steer's bat in the lineup every day. That being said, I don't see any scenario where he doesn't get better in left field than he was. I mean, he was learning it on the fly. I know that he has spent time this offseason working on being a better left fielder, being a better outfielder. So there's just not a scenario for me where he comes back and it has not improved in the defensively.
I think that the Reds have taken a position that if we can get your bat in the lineup, we'll find a spot for you to play. And that's kind of been their position for as long as I can remember, because Adam Dunn played left field. Now, granted, Adam Dunn really couldn't have played many positions defensively, but his bat dictated that he plays somewhere, because you were keeping him in the lineup every single day. Spencer Steer is going to be the Reds' everyday left fielder, I think, come hell or high water. The only thing with this is I do think that the Reds have no backup plan if he doesn't work out, but I think not working out would also entail that he's not hitting, and I just don't see him not hitting. I think he is too smart of a hitter to go through a very prolonged slump that we look at and we say, is Spencer Steer the guy? Because I think he's the guy.
All right, for the audio only folks, video guys, stay here. We're going to keep going. For the audio folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On Reds. Coming up in just a bit in your feeds, there will be a bonus episode that is the Q&A, the remainder of this live edition of Locked On Reds. Thank you all so much for being here and making us your first listen every day. Every day is coming up next week. We're going to continue to dig through this roster and these positions and sort out who's going to be where and how it's going to work and who has the best potential to learn new positions. We're going to dig into all of those things while continuing to monitor the waivers and the rumors and see if Nick Krall makes any other minor moves that may strengthen a few of these areas that we still think need a little bit of strengthening. We're going to gather up all that information, bring it back here to keep you locked on Reds every single day. All right, gang, we're going to continue with your questions and comments. This will be the bonus show for the audio folks. Welcome back in, audio folks. Let me find a good one here, because there's been a lot of talk about all these people moving around. Joseph asks, who is going to be the full-time DH? Is it India? There's not a full-time. DH is the quasi-rest juggle position. There is not going to be one of these guys that just is the DH. We've talked about what the lineup could look like. And as far as a batting order goes, 1 through 6, Jeff, where we landed, 1 through 6, 1 through 7 could be pretty much just set every day. But even in that, those positions are going to change. Where they're playing on the field is going to change from day to day. People are going to scoot. People are going to move around. David Bell is going to want to keep everybody as sharp as possible at multiple positions. There's going to be a lot of movement. DH is going to be, we want to kind of give you a day off, but we kind of also want to get that guy over there to play the position you're normally playing. So you're going to be the DH today, and then you'll get another day off later. That's how they're going to use the DH position, in my estimation.
Yeah, like the Yankees with Giancarlo Stanton, who you don't want playing defense at any position, and Shohei Ohtani at DH because he pitches, so you don't want him playing positions. Really, there's not too many guys that I would say is an everyday DH. The Reds are not the only team that's going to do this. I think most of the league treats the DH as a pseudo rest day, where all you got to worry about is half the game. You don't have to worry about the defensive part.
Vince says if Candelario is at first base, CES is the DH. Here's where it gets fun, because that's not necessarily true. I really think they're going to experiment with CES in right field. I see that coming in spring training. We're also going to see India in the outfield. We're probably going to see Marte get a try in the outfield. They're going to be looking for that right-handed platoon partner. And those three guys are probably the primary candidates. Nick Kroll has already said Jonathan India is going to get some reps out there. So for me, it gets fun, because in a normal baseball world, what you're saying, Vince, there, it'd probably be true, but not with these Reds, not with the flexibility they're trying to create all the way around.
The Reds have a lot of athletes. Like, I think that's kind of being discounted when you look at the position designation next to each player's name. Like, you think of first base for CES, you're like, well, he's there because he's not much of a mover. He's a pretty good athlete, and he can run the bases pretty well too. I think that too, when you look at like the number of games that each player plays at DH, I think it's going to be India and Candelario who kind of fight for the most games at DH, simply because defensively, I think that you can kind of see Noelvi Marte being a better defensive third baseman. You can definitely see Elly De La Cruz being a better third baseman, and you can see CES being a better first baseman than Candelario defensively. And then India will help fill in the different positions that need off days or DH days or whatever. But for the most part, I think he will play more DH than most.
All right, this next one, while not a Red, sadly, I think is relevant. Let's talk about this for just a second. Malachi asks, do we think any major league teams are looking at Joey Votto? We've all heard the Toronto Blue Jays speculation. Whether there's a lot of validity to that or not, really don't know. Nothing truly out of Toronto from the team as far as that goes. But we have heard from the team that they are looking for a corner infielder DH type of player. That's Joey Votto.
Yeah.
But beyond Toronto, Jeff, I have not seen Joey and rumor wise linked to any other team besides that Toronto piece.
I've seen some rumors of maybe San Francisco, but I don't even know that that's a fit for him. And I don't know that that's who they're looking for either. I just know that post that he had about, feeling like it's gravity where he's detached from the ship and he's just kind of floating out there. Nobody's calling him back. Like, I don't think that was like aimed at any one direction. That's just what he's doing right now. That's just his experience right now. And there's no rumors, man. There's no rumors on teams that are trying to go after him right now.
Yeah, the saddest ending for this thing is for Joey to want to play and nobody to give him a look. And I really hope it doesn't come down to that. If he does not end up with a major league gig for 2024, I hope the Reds find some way to involve him somehow if Joey's interested in that. And he might not be. He may go do that school bus thing he's talked about going and doing. It just may disappear. But if he wants to be involved, I would love for the Reds to get him in the booth several games for the year, get him out to the ballpark, give him a advisory role with the hitters, something. There's too much knowledge in his head for it to not be utilized by the Reds if he's willing to share it. So I would hate to see him just disappear.
To be clear, you're not saying on the 26-man roster.
No. A role with the team, not as a player, assistant coach, special advisor to broadcaster extraordinaire, whatever title they want to give him. I would like to see, but no. I think the days of shoehorning Joey Votto onto the 26-man roster are probably well behind us.
As we said, it's super deep.
Let me find another one here for us, Jeff, because I would like to continue the conversation, but I can't talk and do it at the same time. Talk about something.
Yeah, and that's something interesting too. Like it stinks because from a personal perspective, I would love to see Joey Votto come back and retire a Red, get to play a couple games. Let's have like a Joey Votto week or something like that. But I think that's why we had those experiences last year. And even though they were kind of like unplanned and the Reds really didn't make a big deal out of it, but we had the whole standing ovation in his last home game and things like that. Like I kind of think that's what we want. And if Joey were to be asked how he would like to go out, I think that's how he would want it. He's never been a player that has wanted attention for attention's sake. He wanted to be a part of a championship team. He wanted to have a good career and have a long career, but I don't think he wanted that so that there could be a Joey Votto week. Like that's us fans talking. I don't know that that's a team idea, and I don't know that that's a Joey Votto idea.
Let's get back to this outfield experiment that the Reds are going to be conducting, because Joseph Gaditz is asking a question that kind of pings around in my head a lot, or at least he's making a comment that pings around in my head a lot. If they're going to experiment, the Reds, that is, if they're going to experiment with India and CES in right field, Joseph says he likes CES. India's arm out there, he says, I don't know, man. That's the same thing that pops in my head every time we talk about India out there. Do you see him in right field with his arm? Maybe left field? I don't know. It's a real question.
I worry about that too, because I mean, I see, especially if the Pirates are healthy, you see O'Neal Cruz on second base and there's a fly ball to Jonathan India. O'Neal Cruz is advancing 100% of the time.
Yep.
And there's going to be multiple players like that in the division and in the league and things like that. But that's just the example that I have in my brain. Like they did that a lot on Reds outfielders last year because there really wasn't that guy that had the big arm that you're afraid of. And that's what we hear that CES has. We hear that he has a big arm. And I'd kind of like to see that, like, range questions and all and things like that. And how does he run routes in the outfield? That's all stuff that he's going to have to learn. But that's the same with India. India's never played the outfield. So he's got to learn all that too. And he has the question mark of an arm. So I'm with you, Joseph. I would like to see CES out there before I see India.
This is a good one. Alex Watts says, do you see Tyler Stevenson playing right field? Now listen,
was that 2021 he played left?
Played left field for a minute. And so it was before we had him on the show, because off the air, what didn't make it into the recording is we talked about the outfield. And you should have seen it. Like, outfield's not happening with Tyler Stevenson. You should have seen his face. He was just like, no, he didn't say a word. He just, he did not. It is not. He's not playing outfield, folks. It's interesting proposition, but no,
I definitely think that was more of a sarcastic comment, because I
think so too. But I kind of wish we had that grab of him in his faces when we asked him about the outfield,
right?
Because it was funny.
If it would be a GIF, it would be Ron Swanson, like, frowning and just shaking his head, like,
yeah, exactly like that. So, talking about the infielders to the outfield, Ali says, I'm pretty sure McLain was an outfielder in college. Yeah, for UCLA, played center field. Initially, I was there. I was like, why are we working so hard to turn infielders into outfielders when we already have an infielder that is an outfielder? That was before we watched him play at the major league level. I am firmly in the camp. You do not take that dude off of the infield. He's going to be the infield captain, whether they put the C on his chest or not. And you all know how I feel about that at this point. But there's no way I'm moving Matt McLain to the outfield.
No, and I think that if you were to power rank the best defenders on the infield, he is number one. He is the best defender, whether he's at shortstop or second base. He's better than Elly. Like, Ellie's got the electricity. Matt McLain's got the consistency. And I definitely think that if you're moving one of those two to the outfield, I'm moving Elly before I'm moving Matt McLain.
All right, let's get into a few more of these, Jeff. I'm maybe not gonna hit the hour mark today. We might be getting out of here 5 minutes or so. Let's see what else comes across the screen while we're doing it. Doug says Aloha Fridays are definitely the best podcast. Well, I think Monday through Thursday are pretty good too, but thank you. No, you know what makes these Fridays so good is you all. The listeners, the viewers. It's so much fun talking baseball with you guys. It's really why Jeff and I do this. We love this. We say it in the intro, and I know you guys think that's just the intro, but the intro is nothing but truth. We do this because we love talking baseball with you guys, and I can't get enough of it. I wish we could do these shows live all the time, but scheduling and Jeff's wife would kill me if I managed to succeed in getting him pinned down for lives every single day of the week. So that won't happen, but we love these lives. When the off season ends, the Aloha Fridays, we also pause those once the season starts, but we'll do lives throughout the year. There'll be some Saturday special lives where we talk about what's going on. There'll be breaking news lives if something big happens in a game or the Reds make a move. So we love these lives, Jeff.
Oh, absolutely, Steve. And actually, there's something while you're looking. I want to pull this up from Carrie Reiner. She said predictions. Reds will be 200 plus homers, and Elly will get 2 or more inside the park home runs. I think number one is almost a given. I think the Reds are going to smash a lot of home runs this year. The inside the park home run thing is interesting because it requires a lot of different things to work out. The thing that is obvious that needs to work out is something that Elly has control of, and that's just be fast and run around the bases really fast. And he can do that on a daily basis, inside and out. I have no doubt about that. The two things that you need to work out that is out of his control is you need to have an incompetent fielding performance by the outfield, and you need to have an official scorer that doesn't give it a triple plus an error, because that happens a lot too. And in fact, they've gone back and they've done that where they during the game, they call it an inside the park home run. And then they go back a couple of days later and they're like, that was wrong. It needs to be a triple plus an error. And then that throws everything off. So that's the hardest thing for me to predict. That's why inside the park home runs are so fun, because you really can't expect them.
No, and that's why they're usually called little league home runs. It's because of all that stuff you're talking about in the field with errors versus a true inside the park home run. I don't think he gets 2 inside the park home runs. I agree with you. 200 home runs. Yeah, that probably happens. That's an easy one. I think it's much more likely we see Elly steal home a bunch of times than it is we see the inside the park. I can see at least 2 instances throughout the year where he's able to kind of rope-a-dope deke somebody into, getting that steal of home again, especially with as much energy as it gave him the first time he did it. I could see more of that coming in 2024. I
agree with that.
Let's get into a little bit more Matt McLain talk, just because he's kind of becoming my favorite guy. I like how Tim puts this. Tim says that Matt McLain is the straw that stirs the drink. I agree with that. Cincy shirts, if you're listening, there's a promotional opportunity there. I would buy that shirt for sure. That leads me to this, which I do want to talk about, is Malachi asking, will Matt McLain sign an extension soon? He's got to be the first guy on the list, right, Jeff? We keep kind of talking about this. He's
definitely the first guy on our list.
If he was willing to sign an extension right now, do you give him an extension right now today for the money that it's going to take? I mean, I don't want to speculate what those numbers would look like, but do you do it today? I would do it today.
Yeah, I would do it today because I think it's only going to get more expensive. He's one of those guys that I just don't see him having a year, at least not this year, having a year where his value would go down. I think that he's only got it in him to get better, and his floor is so high right now. I think even now you'd be talking about 6-7 years, at least 120 million, maybe more, to give to him in the end, because, and you probably backload that a little bit, but maybe 100 million, but especially with his agent being Scott Boras, that's going to be tough. But that's probably what you're looking at. You buy out his arbitration, and then you buy out his first year or two of free agency. I don't think he's going to go much further than that, because players at the end of the day are looking to make money off of their ability, and they're not just going to sign a lifetime deal. Plus, I don't think the Reds are ever going to sign a Joey Votto type contract ever.
No, it's that year or two, and then that option for a third year that's super expensive. That like, if the Reds were to pick it up, it's one of those kind of deals. But yeah, I think the timing of that is right. I can totally see a scenario where it just makes sense to do it right now, though. If Boris is willing to talk, the Reds should be willing to talk, because I want him locked up. Here's one from Main Street Duel. I don't think Nick Krall is done, they say. I still think the Reds are going to get Bieber and Clase, maybe during spring training. This is an interesting take. And I wanted to ask you about it, Jeff, because could this have been a negotiating ploy from Nick Krall? Could that have been a shot at Cleveland? We know there were conversations. We know those conversations were happening. Could that have been Nick Krall kind of pushing his chips to the center of the table and saying, all right, fine, we're done?
I could see that. I can see that part of it. I don't necessarily know that they're going to end up with Bieber and Clase, because I think that, like I said, that trade package is going to be a lot. And I don't know that the Reds are going to want to pay that. But I could see it being a negotiating tactic, because what do we always say about this front office? They hold things very close to the chest. They do not let things out. So when rumors come out, I'm not going to say you can almost bet on them not happening, but think about the moves that the Reds have made this offseason. None of them were rumored before they happen. And they try to do things like the Atlanta front office tries to do things. Atlanta is very close to it. Last year when they traded for Sean Murphy, there were no rumors about that. This year they traded for Chris Sale. There were no rumors about that. Like, that's where Nick Krall wants to run this front office. And I could see that maybe being partly negotiating ploy with specific teams, but a little bit of a misdirect as a whole, to be like, look, if you hear any rumors, those aren't us. And that way, if there is another big move, we'll all be like, what? Because Nick Krall told us there wasn't going to be another big move. So I could definitely see that being part of the plan for him.
You know, I've had these thoughts. I've kind of bounced this around a little bit, which is why I wanted to throw that comment up there, because I think he meant what he said. I want it to be a psychological warfare type of gig that he's pulling with the other GMs, but I think at the end of the day he meant what he said. I think that just the asking prices for trade packages were simply too high, and there are teams out there that are going to be willing to pay them. I'm glad that Nick Krall is not one of those people. I don't think they should overpay now for a starter that damages the program, that damages the growth, that limits the window, so to speak. So I'm glad that he walked away. And that leads me to this one from Allie, who thinks the management, that being Nick Krall and the front office of the Reds, is looking to spend at the trade deadline if the team is competitive at that point, if a need has identified itself, really, I think is what is being said here. And I agree with that. I think the Reds will reevaluate when we get closer to the trade deadline. And if they do need to then go rent that outfield bat that it hits right-handed, or rent a starting pitcher or a relief pitcher, I think they will at that time, because the packages will be different, because you're going to be purchasing a rental versus purchasing a guy for the whole season. So I think that's a more likely scenario.
I think it'd be really interesting, because I was listening to Baseball America's podcast. They did a kind of a look at the Reds' new top 10 prospect rankings and talked about some of the prospects and stuff. And they had a really good point about the depth of the system. They were talking specifically about Ty Floyd, who's a name that we've mentioned a few times in different trade rumors and things like that, but he was a second-round pick for the Reds last year, a very good college pitcher. And they said, they're like, in most farm systems, this guy would be a top 5 guy. In the Reds farm system, he doesn't even make the top 10. That's how deep they are. They have the kind of things, and they said this, they said they have the kind of prospect and the kind of players that other teams covet, that when it comes to the trade deadline, when teams are just trying to trade players and contract years and things like that, they don't have to dip into their top 10 prospects in order to get somebody at the deadline. So they could see that being a reason why the Reds didn't make a move for Shane Bieber or Dylan Cease right now, because of the amount of talent that they can pull from. And I think it's interesting, because Nobody that covers the Reds farm system uses the words prospect hug. That is something that we as fans like to ascribe to the Reds because they didn't make a trade, because they didn't get aggressive, because they didn't go out and do something. They're not prospect hugging. They're just making sure that they keep the ammunition in the chamber here. Like, this is something that the Reds know. Not every prospect pans out, but if you have a ton of them to throw at the problem where the Reds have to draft and develop from within, then you're much better off than if you have a couple that work out 1 year and then trade everybody else for veterans that are only here for another year or two, and then deplete your farm system for the rest of the future. I think Nick Krall understands that, and that's why I've been pretty happy, not ecstatic, but pretty happy with this offseason where he's figured out a way to improve the present without jeopardizing the future.
All right, let's do one more here. And we talked about him a little bit tongue in cheek as an outfielder, but let's talk about Stevenson, because Lawrence thinks Stevenson's going to have a huge year, 20 or more home runs, period. Not 40. Lawrence, you're not going to double down on my
as far as you went last year.
Not going to win as far as I went last year. All right, 20 home runs, Jeff. Tyler Stevenson, I think that's very, very realistic. I think that what we saw from him towards the end of last year, I think he applies all that moving into 2024. Better year coming. 20 home runs? I think so.
I think somebody asked last week over under 22.5, and I think we both said over.
Over. So yeah, 25 home runs seems I could get behind 25. I think that what we'll see from Tyler Stevenson is a comfortable catcher. He'll put up really good catcher numbers. We're not going to have to experiment with all this moving around and Stevenson, himself has said he thinks he can be a 25 homer guy. He wants to play 130 games a year. If he gets in that many games just as a catcher, then I think that's realistic.
And I want to end on this because you said that we got one more before we get out. I want to get it because I want to talk about this. And Malachi Hayes asks, what is the Cubs waiting for? What are the Cubs waiting on? I have no idea, Malachi. And if you listen to our Locked On Cubs guys, they're going nuts because they don't get it. They spent all this money to get Craig Counsell away from the Brewers. And now maybe they were a little bit worried, a little bit bummed that they missed out on Shohei Ohtani, but they haven't done anything. There's no one. Like, they haven't signed a relief pitcher. They haven't signed a starter. They haven't signed a bat. Cody Bellinger's still out there. He was one of the biggest reasons that the Cubs were any kind of successful last year because he led that lineup. And they still haven't brought him back. Like, I find it so weird to me, just as an outside observer that honestly wouldn't mind it if the Cubs kept doing what they're doing. I find it so strange that they haven't spent anything yet. And the more that the offseason goes along, you kind of wonder. Now, there's still plenty of talent out there on the free agent market for them to go spend on, and we could be having a completely different conversation before spring training begins. But the fact that the Reds are basically done with their shopping and the Cubs haven't even gotten out of the car in the parking lot yet is so strange to me.
No, I completely agree. And for me, it's only the second strangest story in the National League Central right now. For me, the strangest story in the National League Central is all of the odds makers saying that the St. Louis Cardinals are the best team in this division. It's cool. Cubs and Cardinals, one thing you can count on is that those two are always going to be in the conversation and that St. Louis Cardinals are always going to be awful. And that is where we're going to wrap up today's show. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Reds. Thanks, as always, for making us your first listen every day. Everydayers, coming up next week, we are going to continue to dissect this team and get you ready for spring training. Jeff, we've got a lot of offseason left. The Reds, they've said they might be done. They may be done. But what can folks expect from us the rest of the way this offseason?
They can expect us to keep our ears to the ground in case anything does happen. They can expect us to be keeping an eye toward the future being this coming season and who's going to be where and who's going to play what and how many home runs is Elly De La Cruz going to hit. And they can expect us to be Locked On Reds every single day.
I love that your aversion for buttons has led to 2 shirts.
It's cold, man.